All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Accelerate DFX, designed for usability, user experience, and humans. Last time I did not introduce myself. I will not make the same mistake today. My name is David Hussey. I work with the Accelerator Center. I'm the Client Experience Coordinator at the Advanced Manufacturing and Hardware Innovation Lab, or as many of you may know it as, just 44 Gaukel Street. So just a couple of housekeeping items out of the way first. Washrooms are out that door and on the far wall, just a little bit to your right. The fire escape exit, which I am told we need to explain, is out that door towards Duke Street, and that's pretty much it. Just to kind of give a little bit of context, I know a lot of you have been to these sessions before, but I just wanted to explain where we're coming from for this. So the AC and somewhat the ecosystem as a whole has not always been amazing at getting really into the nitty-gritty and the weeds about how to make hardware and how to make physical products as a startup. So we decided what better way than to bring together some of the people that have done it before, as well as experts that we work with every day, and put them all into a room and get them to explain different aspects of the manufacturing side, user experience, durability is next week, and all those different sorts of things. So we're really excited that everyone's going to be here today. We have Matt Rendall from Clearpath Robotics, who's going to be giving the keynote on this session, and so without further ado, I'll let Matt begin.
Thanks. How's everyone's experience going so far this morning? I've never presented in a room like this. I have this burning itch to vote on something. Okay, so today I want to talk about some of the experience that we've collected developing and designing robots for a human world. It's probably the area that I'm least experienced in, but most passionate about. And I'm hoping that I can provide to you sort of the founder experience coming from a very technical engineering background into trying to craft an experience in a product category that is typically lacking for inspiration. So just quickly to calibrate everyone here, a little bit about Clearpath and what we do. We have a mission to improve human life by automating the world's dullest, deadliest, and dirtiest jobs. So we're really excited about what robots can do to change society and generally for the better. Our business is split into two categories. Our first business, as I think most of the community knows it when we came through the Accelerator Center, Clearpath Robotics. We've grown to become a world leader in robotics for rapid prototyping applications. So we work with all kinds of different companies, governments, and academic institutes to bring next generation autonomous vehicle technology into the world. But more recently, and our really heavy focus now that we've raised venture capital is on our auto motors business unit, which is self-driving vehicles for material transport. You can kind of think of it like the Google car for pallets in a factory instead of people in a city. So what you see up on the screen is our first business unit, Clearpath Robotics. We're kind of known as the yellow and black robot people. And I wanted to highlight this because in our very first pursuits releasing product into the market, by dumb luck really, we created a positive user experience. And I say that because we were selling to researchers and we weren't thinking about user experience. And the researcher experience improves when they have to tinker and figure it out themselves. So we had shitty documentation, and that improved their experience. And that was just total dumb luck, and is very much not the case in our new business pursuit. So we've been on a very steep learning curve for interaction design, user experience, and to a certain extent, well, I think brand and experience go very closely together, especially when you're doing a hardware product. So we've also had to rethink a lot about what we do with branding. Into auto motors. So what you see on the screen here is Auto. This is our self-driving pallet mover. and we're selling this product into large automotive companies, large healthcare companies, large consumer packaged goods companies. So the customers that we've been able to announce publicly include John Deere, Toyota, Caterpillar, and General Electric, and we're helping them move stuff around their factory floor more efficiently. So what I want to talk about is some of the things that we've learned that hopefully will help save you a lot of time and money and deliver a better experience to your customers. Really what we've been trying to do is deliver an experience that people will talk about. And one of the sort of rallying objectives here is if you nail experience, you will streamline adoption. And a big part of that, if you create an experience that people will talk about, it becomes kind of an inbuilt marketing engine for your organization as well. So I've kind of split the conversation into 3 categories for today. I want to start by talking about building on a natural foundation. This is kind of like a shortcut that we've come across to help accelerate our thinking and learning curve in experience design. Designing for real-world interactions, I really want to focus on some of the things that we've been thinking about, putting hardware products out into the world. And then an interesting sort of exploratory category around zero UI and how user interfaces and user experiences break, I think, the traditional mold in a world where when the system is working, there is no interaction, there is no human in the loop. So let's start by just kind of looking at what does the world of industrial automation look like. When you go into a factory, it's a very utilitarian place. These are the types of machines that I'm sorry, the contrast is pretty bad, but these are the types of machines that you typically find in a factory. Form in its simplest is serve the basic functionality, like the base of the pyramid in terms of the hierarchy of user needs. On the left-hand side of the screen, you have a forklift. On the right-hand side, you have an industrial robot that would be used to weld or assemble a car body, for instance. And this was our very first prototype of auto. At the time, it was called Rocksteady as a code name, and we hadn't really put much thought into branding or user experience at the time, and you can see that it follows very closely to this uninspired utilitarian form factor. We built this product, showed the video, and this is actually the demonstration milestone that we hit in order to raise our Series A. And a big part of our milestone for the Series A was to turn this Rocksteady prototype into an actual real-world product, and we learned a lot along the way and made a lot of mistakes along the way. What we wanted to do in creating a product was put an inspired design, an inspired product into an uninspired world, and we sort of scoured the market. What are the types of products where we think that something analogous has happened? And I think Nest was one of our favorite examples, because before they came around and applied, I think, some really important thinking and practices to user experience design, industrial design, and branding. You had, little plastic boxes that looked like warts on a wall. And so fast forward now to the latest product that we've announced. It's more of a crafted experience. We've been focusing more on packaging and unboxing and commissioning. And we've tried to create our Nest thermostat for the industrial world. So that's kind of a 2-minute recap of where we were and how far we've come. So let's talk about a couple of the building block lessons. So we want to build on a natural foundation. What you're going to see here is a video of a work in process prototype. This is before we started nailing some of our lighting systems. And at the time, we had decided that the best way to communicate motion was to have these weird little blinking lights, like it almost looks alien. This was how our robot communicated intent to the world around it. And so fast forwarding a little bit here into designing for real-world interactions. When you have a product out in the physical world, the role of light and sound and motion can come together to really impact the way somebody experiences your product. In this case, I'm highlighting light, and when I watch this, it's almost like nails on the chalkboard for me. These like alien lights are just really offensive now. And we spent a lot of time whiteboarding and trying to figure out how do we improve the experience, how do we make something more intuitive, more natural in our target environment. And we ended up stumbling upon this idea that what can we build upon? What are things that are so common and familiar that it's second nature to everyone? And I really like Malcolm Gladwell's quote, 10,000 hours is the magic number for greatness. We ended up picking the automobile as an anchor architecture for thinking about how to engineer our product. And hopefully most of you are never going to spend 10,000 hours in a car, but I think it still does highlight this second nature. You almost plug into somebody's brainstem. So we tried to proliferate the automotive analogy throughout everything that we do. So it's a very familiar place, and we build upon that. And if you rewind back to 2014 when we started releasing this product, there wasn't even standard vocabulary for describing what it was that we did. Self-driving car was not a mainstream term. It was in the mainstream, but you still had to explain it to people. And if you looked at our industry, it was very far decoupled from the work that Google was doing in the self-driving car. People would refer to them as autonomous mobile robots, unmanned systems, autonomous systems, and one of the very first things that we did with this metaphor was say, we are making a self-driving car. And by doing that, we could anchor to a very familiar place and open up the whole automotive analogy. So one of the very first things that we did was kill those alien lights. And this was one of our first animations for what we wanted to accomplish in a new lighting scheme. I don't need to give you a user manual now to say what this vehicle is about to be doing. We've taken that and proliferated it across the entire state machine for our lighting system. Turn signals, reverse lights, even when you're at an intersection and you want to signal to somebody else that they can go, you can flash the high beams. There's a lot of sort of natural behaviors that you can pull from in automotive. And then on the software side, we figured let's continue with the automotive metaphor, and we built our equivalent of Google Maps. And so just by show of hands, is there anybody in here who does not know their way naturally around Google Maps as a software application? Right? That's really powerful, and that's something really important for us to plug into when we think about designing a self-driving vehicle control system for a factory environment where blue-collar workers that in some cases don't even have a completed high school education need to naturally interact with the system in a world where we really don't want to provide a user manual if we don't have to. So this is the Google Maps standard interface. And here's a video. This is about a year old, but you can see that you've got the panel on the left-hand side. You've got routes where the vehicles are driving. You can see where the roads are and the parking spaces are, and you can see where your vehicles are in the factory. So this is an automotive plant, and they're using auto to transport powertrain components from machining center to machining center to machining center. This interface is entirely point and click, drag and drop. So we've taken self-driving vehicles from you need a PhD in robotics in order to effectively manage one of these vehicles to anybody who's worked with Google Maps hopefully will be able to interact with our system with minimal orientation and training. And we wouldn't have been able to accomplish any of that without that spark, that insight that we can plug into the automotive metaphor. And so my advice for all of you based on that experience is figure out what your equivalent shortcut is. What framework exists in the brainstem of your users that you can plug into, because the moment you do that, you shortcut so much training and education that is just tacit inside of all of your users. Okay, so now designing for real-world interactions. One of the things that I love the most about Auto is that it moves. The moment that a product can move, you can start tapping into a whole new category of character design and start thinking about, like, I love Pixar, it's one of our sources of inspiration. The emotion that they can, the emotional response that they can incite by watching a large lamp interacting with a small lamp is pretty remarkable when you think about it as an inanimate object that really only has motion, light, and sound in order to create that emotional connection. If you don't know what I'm talking about here, right, so how do we take this idea as inspiration and try and give Auto a personality inside of a factory? And not only that, once you've posed that question, what type of personality do you want the robot to have? And it turns out this is an area where there is some research happening in the world, and I wanted to show one of my favorite researchers is a guy named Guy Hoffman. There's a quick snippet for some of the work that he's doing. So he's trying to use motion to sort of show an interplay between the human and the robot. And really, it's just a couple of degrees of freedom and some programming, but you can really feel a personality in this robot. And he took that experience and he created a dock, like a Bluetooth speaker. So I have a Bose, like a little desktop Bose speaker, and it just sits there and it plays music. But this robot, with a couple of extra degrees of freedom and some creativity with how you program it, you can really change the nature of this device and how you interact with it. I'm sharing the microphone. Anyways, this is the type of thinking that we were trying to apply in character design for Auto. And we went through a whole bunch of different iterations, and ultimately, you know, after going through kind of the alien state where it had those weird glowing lights, we wanted to try and create a robot that had this intelligence to it, where it felt almost superhuman, and we realized that actually kind of freaked people out. And what we wanted to try and tap into was something that felt more like a pet, right? A dog is non-threatening, it's loved, it's trusted, and so what type of motion and sound can you program into your machine to try and incite that type of emotional response? And so we want to use motion, sound, and light to communicate trust, reliability, and predictability is very important in our environment, but do so in a way that isn't utilitarian and uninspired. And when you start thinking about how motion plays into how people respond, I mean, I don't really even need to put the words up on the screen to say, you know, what are the behaviors that you can picture in your mind when I say, how does a safe driver behave and how does an aggressive driver behave? All of you have experiences interacting, and all of you fit somewhere on the spectrum of safe to aggressive. So here's a video from some of the work that we're doing in the logistics world, and we've applied a lot of care into crafting the behaviors that you see here, and when you've done it properly, you almost don't even notice it. It's time-lapse, so it's going to be a little bit the nuances of it, how it slowly approaches an intersection and stops at the stop sign, how it speeds up. On the return stroke, you'll see it interacting with a forklift driver. This is a piece of equipment, but we want people to respond to it like it's like a human forklift driver. The green crosswalks are pedestrian crossways, so it stops and it signals to operators. And in this case, humans are actually interacting with the robot for loading and unloading of the product. And just from a human factors perspective, what's really interesting is a lot of our very early interactions in new environments like this, workers had a very gutturally negative response to auto. They were threatened by it and what it could do to their workplace. By the end of a 3-day pilot that we did here, the worker that was doing the unloading on day 1 was basically trying to sabotage the machine so that it failed in the pilot, and by the end of day 3, he had a pile of boxes. This is Otto's pile. Don't touch Otto's pile. This is his stuff. And to see that change in response over such a short period of time was really remarkable, actually. Subtly, though, what I'm most proud of is that people actually personify Otto and call it a him. We branded Otto to have a burly, reliable German persona so that you could trust it, that it would be reliable and predictable in your environment. So the point that I wanted to conclude on for the second pillar is when you think about your product and your brand and your experience in the physical world is so tightly coupled. The Otto brand is part interaction design, part user experience, part industrial design, and part marketing and branding. There's a lot of thought and it all needs to come together. Okay, and then finally, Zero UI and autonomous vehicles. Zero UI is a newer term for me, but you're starting to see it emerge with like the Amazon Echo. There really isn't an interface in its normal state, right? When you set it up, there's work that you need to do. I assume I don't have one. I don't want Amazon with microphones in my house, but you would just speak to it naturally, and that's the interface. Well, the extrapolation of that for us, this is a facility that we operate in Cambridge. We've got about 25 vehicles running. It's a 24/7, 365 lights out operation. In normal operation, there's no people even in the environment. So there's this idea that I haven't properly been able to explore yet, but what is zero UX? There are no users to experience your product. And at what points in the robot journey do humans interact? Here's another example, right? You've got robots working with robots. When this system is running, there are no people interacting with the machine. So during steady state, it's zero UI and it's zero UX. That doesn't mean that there isn't a user experience, but the user experience is typically in commissioning workflows or troubleshooting, which means that when we've done our jobs right, the only time people interact with our product is when we've screwed something up. And that's really important because that's a really sensitive point on the user journey, and how you deal with those types of corner cases you really need to nail, because if the only time people are interacting with your product is when you've screwed up, you have a very high probability that they're just going to hate your product. So that's been something really hard for us to develop a strategy to overcome. So this is the first time we've ever used a user experience map or a user experience journey to try and understand all the different corner cases where we've screwed something up, they interact with us, how do we make them very happy? And through the experience of building this competence into our business, I came across a study that I really love. I don't know if this is like common knowledge for people with background in user experience design, but if you don't already know this, it's absolutely incredible. So there's a university professor, a researcher at, I think it's the University of Washington. His name is John Gottman. I think it's John Gottman. He was doing a sociology study. He wanted to understand marriages, and he filmed couples for 2 minutes, and with greater than 90% accuracy, he was able to predict if they would stay married or not. And it was distilled out a golden ratio, if during that 2-minute interval they had 5 positive experiences for every 1 negative experience, with 90% accuracy, he could predict if they would stay married. And I think there's a lot of truth to that in how you craft your user experience. And I think that I don't know if the ratio is 5 to 1, but there is a ratio. And for us, we default it to 5 to 1. We need to create 5 positive experiences for every 1 negative experience in our equivalent 2-minute interval, because we want to stay married to our customer. Yeah, and ultimately, all of this boils down to emotion. So we're really trying to figure out how do we make people feel, because that's what they remember. They're not going to remember anything else. I have another video, but I don't have audio, so I won't show it. But that's basically a crash course on some of the things that we've learned and I'm passionate about. I'm looking forward to talking about it on the panel. How am I for time? You're good. Yep.
So last time I did this introduction, I was a little bit mean, and Don got a little bit sad. I'm going to introduce now the moderator of our panel, Don Thompson, who is the AC's product development mentor. He has a ton of experience with launching products and making things in general. And I find, for those of you that interacted, you just know how well-versed he is and how amazing he is to interact with. So I'll leave it up to him to take it from here.
Yep. Yeah, I was almost offended by the Amazon Echo comment, considering I was part of it. But I think the most concerning thing was the 5 to 1 ratio in 2 minutes. Like, I'm not sure I'm not schizophrenic with my wife or not.
That's why you and I are going to stay married.
Yeah, I think so. That's scary, scary, scary. Okay, so I'm Don Thompson, for those of you who don't know me. I've been moderating these panels and the product development mentor with the AC. And so just going through the panel, get everybody introduce themselves, and then we'll start the discussion. If there are any burning questions, put your hand up, and we'll get your questions in. I have some written down, but certainly the more the merrier from the audience. Okay, so you've already introduced yourself. Steve, do you want to start? Mic on.
Right. So I'm Steve Fike. I'm the design strategy mentor for the Accelerator Center and the creative director for SnapP Design. Do you want me to keep going?
Nope.
Okay.
Turn you off.
Hi, I'm Randy Yang, Senior Industrial Designer for Inertia, mainly focused on a lot of consumer goods and product development.
I'm Janice DeYoung. I'm a user researcher, but I perhaps uniquely focus on the needs of future users. So what could impact your business and your users down the road? And most importantly, what can you do about it today? How would that impact your products and services now?
I'm Les Hurst, and I'm a product development facilitator and mentor. I help bring out really the wisdom within the people that I'm working with. And right now I'm collaborating with Peter and Matt over at Berlin Craftworks, and we're developing our own thing. So pleased to be here.
Very cool. So it was interesting. One of the things that you said in your presentation, which I wrote down, was, if you nail experience, you will streamline adoption. And one of the things that we try to focus on here at the AC is obviously how do we build successful, scalable businesses. And it just, maybe can you expand on that a little bit with, from the presentation you gave, just the nailing the experience. What does that look like, feel like? How do people know that they've nailed it? Is it a smiling face, or is it, big checks, or is there other subtle nuances?
That's a really long question to answer. A really long answer to...
Well, you start it, and then we'll kick it down the line.
One of the first product designers that we brought in gave a really great presentation as we were trying to transform the culture of our organization to be more design-centric and product-centric. And he used the smartphone analogy and talked about how before the iPhone there were plenty of other smartphones, but they hadn't really nailed the user experience, and that's why they didn't have the adoption that Apple did so quickly. And I feel like Apple is used as an example so much that it's almost cliche, but I do feel like it's an appropriate answer to that question.
Yeah.
So I think if you want people to talk about your product, and you go back to what I had on the agenda, right? Create an experience that people will talk about. You need to do something that surprises and delights them. You need to give your customers an experience that they didn't expect, but that resonates very positively emotionally with them. And that is it's not the only thing, it's a necessary but insufficient condition in order to create that experience that people will talk about. And that's where you get sort of that viral dynamic where people talk about it and then they speak very highly of it and their friend buys it and they tell 4 people and just...
Well, the idea of nailing the customer experience and finding that moment of delight. So I don't know, Randy, you've developed lots of different products and what have you. So what are some of those kind of moments of delight that you've found?
So it's a really good question, and when you were asking that, I was like thinking back through my career and thinking which products have actually nailed it. And it is a really tough question to define because a lot of times once we ship a product out, we don't necessarily have the chance to actually re-engage or the client or the product itself. But one of the key things I think that I constantly push on any sort of process is to really try to distill down any function or any interface to sort of its simple need. And I think piggybacking on the Apple comparison there, it's really about, at any given time, any given function, when the user is interacting with that particular function, what does he or she really need to focus on? And I think that's sort of it's part of more of the complex areas in design to do. You start from a really complex, functions, and then you have to distill this down to the one thing. And I think any product that can do that will really, really nail the user experience.
What do you think, Janice?
Yeah, I think from a user research standpoint, it's this might be a theme that I end up talking about a lot today, but if you're trying to find out if you do have something that nails it or brings that delight, I think you have to rely on not necessarily what people say, but what they do, how they actually behave. I'm sure you could, put a bunch of people in a room in a focus group and say, "You like this? Would you buy it?" And they say, "Sure, yeah, absolutely." But for the example, like Otto, for example, looking at that man at the end of the 3 days, and then he started to sort of anthropomorphize it and use it and prioritize it. His behaviors said more than perhaps what just people saying their opinion is, or the yes, no. That observing in action and how they react and behave will give you more knowledge on how well you've achieved that goal.
It's interesting because it's the idea of, a good wine, how it takes time on the palate to kind of absorb and really get the whole sensory perception of it, right? And so I don't know, sure, Les, what are some of the thoughts you have just around when you've seen customers that just, you nailed it, and how do you know you nailed it?
That's a great question. How do we know we nailed it? I think just really the way that I find out about that is just by having conversations with people and really looking for the subtle cues. So, because what people say quite often, what we say in our rational minds is not the deeper truth. So I think a lot of times it's just looking for those subtle feelings from people, finding out what it really meant to them rather than did it work, did it fulfill this function. So to me it's a little bit nebulous, but it's finding out if things resonated with somebody on an emotional level.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So I don't know. I guess I'll talk to Steve, since he's a fellow mentor of mine of the AC. So what are some of your thoughts though on this?
So I think that one of the best things that you said in that entire presentation is the experience that you delivered actually did nail it the first time. Mm-hmm. And having that understanding of who you're building an experience for is probably the most critical part of any of this. The reality is that there are certain people who like discovery. There are early adopters from a typical perspective, are looking for discovery. They want to tinker, they want to play. And when you're building for mass market, that's something where that moment of delight is a different experience. It's about showing them something that they didn't necessarily expect. I think one of the biggest things that you know, everybody loves talking about Apple. It's a great experience, but there's also a notion of, you know, what Apple did wasn't create the most compelling experience on the face of the planet. They built something, and then they spent a lot of money and a lot of time teaching people how to use their interface before the product was even launched. And it's something that I think is overlooked, but it's an important part of product development, where really you have to understand not just the physical and digital product you're building, but your marketing budget, your reach, your customers, the people who you're reaching out to and talking with, because you can build something that is the most compelling product on the face of the planet, but if it requires a small bit of education and you can't reach those customers before you get there, your product will fail. Apple, I don't know if anybody remembers the commercials, but it was a dude in a black shirt who sat there and talked about how intuitive the design was and how intuitive the interface was. And meanwhile, the entire time he's showing you exactly what to do. And a lot of really interesting things come up when you look at your interface as a teaching tool as well. When you start looking at your product and the path to development as, this is a system in where I can educate my user as to the intricacies of this platform and give them something that they can really revel in about how they learned this trick, even though you designed this trick in there from the very first step. So I think it is about designing, you know, a compelling experience, but sometimes you want to build experiences that aren't quite complete because of the market, or you want to build something that, you know, sells and has a story and a message that I can get out and sell this product. But really, the value is something that is a little bit more hidden, and you're going to teach that experience and show that value proposition later through the product.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's interesting, the word sell always gets my ears up, because that's part of what I try to push people to do, is sell something, damn it. And so, you know, part of it is there's a balance and a tension that you have to have in terms of how much design work do I do, how much polishing of the apple do I do, or other metaphor, versus launching a minimum viable product to the marketplace. And so I'm not sure, you know, Les, what are your thoughts in terms of just balancing that tension between, I got to get a product to market, and I want to make sure it's going to be a great experience? Got to turn your mic on.
Thank you.
Yep.
Of course, there's always schedules, and schedules are getting tighter and tighter all the time, in my experience. The teams that I've worked in the best, I can think of one particular experience where there was a lot of creative tension on the design team. So there was four designers, engineers in this particular case, and we all came from different perspectives. So there was a lot of kind of, like I said, creative tension on the team, and we knew that we needed to get it done. So there was some of us that were more kind of on the, wow, this has got to be perfect, it's got to be beautiful, it's got to, and then there was, you know, just get it done kind of people. So we just, I think what worked well is by everybody listening to one another. But the other thing was having a minimal viable product that could meet the timelines. So we kind of had that one in our back pocket. We knew there was problems with it, but we knew that we were going to be able to meet the dates and not all get fired because we missed the dates or whatever. But in the background, we were all working on the solution that we knew would be better. And as it turned out, we were able to, you know, put a big push on in the last few months and get the better solution out. So for me, sometimes it means two parallel paths, or two parallel paths. So the minimum viable product, and also working on what we'd really like to put out of the market. Mm-hmm. And hopefully we have the time to do it.
So what are your thoughts on Steve? What, in terms of just the experience you have with Snappy or past experience with BlackBerry and beyond?
So I think there's a lot of interpretation to what a minimum viable product is. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that, again, depends on, you know, timelines and budget, but it also depends on your market. You know, if you're building something for a crazy high-end brand, you know, building something that is somewhat polished but not quite done isn't actually what your MVP becomes. It's about understanding that there's a lot of different sides to what goes into this product and how you're going to build it. And when people start talking about, well, I'm gonna release a piece of software and I'm gonna get it out and then I'm gonna slowly grow that user base, it completely depends on that market. If you build a product that is, you know, going after the elite and you have one flaw in it and it isn't that custom hand-holding experience that they were expecting, they're not going to stick around for the next iteration. Where if you're trying to build something for the mass market and you're building a communication tool, that's a different experience. And so there's, yeah, I like to go back to selling things too, but it's about that notion of who are you selling this to and what experience do they expect? Because if you don't hit that expectation, or in some cases at least educate them as to what that experience is going to be and why it's going to have some drawbacks, you know, it falls flat.
Well, Janice, what kind of like research do you need to do? Because it's all about understanding the customer, right? And so what do you do? What does that look like?
I think there's a lot of talk about doing user-driven design or user-centered design, and people say, oh, we follow this process, and they'll say, yes, user-centered design, and we do usability studies at the end of the design of our product. And I'm like, well, that's great, but that's actually kind of putting the user last. It's a good first step, like it's a good foray into understanding the user. But there's, if you really want to put the user at the center of the design, you have to put it at the very beginning of the exploring of your project. So doing ethnographic or contextual research, exploring the needs of future users, getting out there and observing people, finding those sort of latent needs will help lead to asking the right questions to make the right design of the product. If you already have your product designed and then you just sort of put it in front of people and say, you like it? Yes, no. Is this good? Yes, no. Your product might never be delivering on a real need anyway.
It's true. Like I think with auto or the products that you do, it can be difficult, right? Because these aren't, $10 products. These are, thousands of dollars. So what kind of short, sharp experiments have you been able to do with your products to, identify customer opportunities?
So, I mean, my perspective is colored by the fact that, wearing the CEO hat, one of your primary jobs is make money at a rate faster than you lose money, right?
That's good.
Yep. So that's something that you've got to keep front and center. And so in the very first prototyping that we did with Auto, I showed you the orange bot. There was a version of the orange bot that we didn't even paint it. We just wanted to get it in front of customers, and we needed to understand what they liked about it, what they didn't like about it, so that we could get money to build the next version. In the orange robot that I shared, the goal of that was to cement a Series A. And that was a different type of money. I think customer money is way, way better. And so something that I think is important to understand is what product are you building and what maturity in the market is there for that category of product? Because in the very nascent days of a category, design as a competitive advantage is not necessarily critical path to getting early money out of the market. And you contrast that against like Slack, for instance. Slack has a really incredible adoption curve, I think, because they nailed the experience and solved a particular problem that they saw in communication. The user experience was their competitive advantage, right?
Well, and it's interesting because your customer, maybe having some little rougher around the edges for a warehouse application is okay. They're going to be more willing to accept that versus a consumer electronics customer, somebody who's looking for a kitchen appliance or something. There's a very different need and expectation, I would think, from those customers.
Yeah, I mean, so our customer demographic, if you kind of spend time interviewing people and really try to understand how they prioritize things, the number one thing is safety. So you can have a beautifully crafted experience, but if it's an erratic, unsafe product, it is just a complete non-starter. So they would rather take a clunky experience that they know is safe according to what they consider safe, and that's sort of the first order that you need to address.
Right.
But our thought was that in this uninspired world of industrial equipment, you've got people, and those people have emotions and responses to things, and we kind of wanted to well, I don't mean to be insensitive with the comment, but we wanted to bring some sex appeal into industrial automation. And so if you think about like what are the things that make a sports car attractive and really gets the like people will open up their wallet and pay a huge premium for a sports car because I don't know, something irrational when you look at when you look at the
30 and 50.
Yeah, right. The function of a sports car versus a sedan is I want to drive from point A to point B. You're tapping into something emotional. So design, we are trying to make design a competitive advantage for us.
Right.
I think the things that we're doing are different.
Yeah, no,
in that
it's
regard.
interesting from a category perspective as well, right? So I'm sure, Randy, what are some of the consumer products you've done, and how have you balanced that whole sex appeal, right, with minimum viable product that we can, again, go and test things and not poison the well at the same time?
I think so. So again, I think we talked about a lot of different stages of the product, and I think one of the things that at the outset you really have to figure out exactly what's your first prototype, or what's that first need really going to be. So we get a lot of clients that come in and say, well, I got this great idea and I just need a prototype. Well, then you have to ask your questions. Is this prototype for a trade show? Because then, at a trade show, it's a little bit more sort of controlled environment versus I just need to get it in front of an investor, which is also a different type of prototype. So you really have to sort of set your goals and your expectations to that. And then to sort of echo what Janice was saying, once you sort of set that sort of expectation, then you go and ask yourself, at a trade show, what kind of customers are we looking at? Who are actually going to be coming? Are they the actual end users? Versus at the investors, they're probably not going to be the end users, but there's a different type of play you have to play there with your product to be able to, get the buy-in as well. So, and for example, we have a client who does a lot of child car seats, and sort of on the same level where safety is a huge factor in child car seats. But all in all, it is still a consumer product. It's really, moms, if anybody's a mom here, they have their voices like to be heard when it comes to child safety and product, especially in terms of the overall appeal of it, because now you're showing off your car seat when you're driving around to other moms.
Well, I know with mine, if I have a car seat, I don't care how good it looks personally. That's my perspective, as long as I put the damn thing in my car.
Yes.
Right, and that's the amount of car seats I went through because I threw them. It's ridiculous. So, but it's interesting. This hierarchy of needs is going to be different by customers, right? And so the segmentation is really important. So, what are some of the things, Janice, that you do in the early stage of the design process, just to kind of get the right feedback? And I can have a bunch of people in a room, and I could do two-way mirrors. Like, what's the process that you use?
Right. So. A technique that, not necessarily focusing on the future, but looking at current users and what their needs are, I like to get into their actual environment, like go where users are, because you learn so much more when you're actually in their environment and seeing their behaviors, rather than being in a canned room with like that two-way mirror and like, oh, try not to pay attention to the man behind the curtain. And they tend to filter a bit more or keep up appearances a bit more. When you go into their real environment, you see what items they use, you see what photos they have, what's important to them, and especially after a longer discussion, you start getting more of these truths and indicating what the real problems are that you might not get in perhaps a survey or other kind of research methodology. So I highly recommend sort of contextual user inquiry to learn so much more about the environment that the person works in.
So it's like getting out to the wild. It's was it Diane Fossey, whatever the gorilla
Yeah,
researcher,
and there's
right?
lots of different methods that you can use. And I know that many startups operate on a very short time frame and a very short budget. And I like to think of designing the user research process much like the design process in itself, in that you have needs that you're trying to meet. You have constraints that you're trying to work around. And there are different tools that you can use to get you the information, the right information you need at the right time. But I think it's most important to know what's the actual question that you're trying to answer before you start designing that research study. Because if you don't know that, then you're not going to get the results you need.
So who wants to talk about the actual question? Because because you can go in, you can lead the witness. There's all these things you can do incorrectly because you're trying to design for an outcome that you want to occur, right? And of these two things that you would never buy, which one will you buy? Because you have to buy one of them, right?
Right.
It's that idea. So how do you make sure you're asking the right question, you're presenting the right thing?
I tend to do more sort of semi-structured interviews where it's not necessarily saying, do you like X or Y, yes or no? People are going to try to impress you, or say the right answer, they'll try to read you to figure out like, well, what am I supposed to say? Is this the right one? I have there's a classic old-timey example of the Sony boombox in the 80s. This is a color material kind of example. But they did that classic, bring people into a room and show them these different colors of boom boxes they were going to release. They had black and they had yellow and they had green. And what do you think? Which one would you buy? And a lot of people said, oh, this green one is fantastic. Like, I love it. And everybody's sitting there going, oh, goody. And they're writing down, like, sell the green, make all the greens. And then, but at the end of the session, they'd say, thank you very much for your time. As a thank you gift, we have all the boom boxes here in different colors. Take which one you like home. And nobody took the green ones. They took the black ones, because when it's actually in your home, you're not going to take the weirdo green one, you're going to take the black one. So that goes to making sure you have the right idea and open mind and crafting that research appropriately.
Well, Les, what's some of the crafting of research that you've done? Like, I want to give people a flavor of kind of what good research should kind of feel like, look like when they're going through it.
Sure, and it's interesting because most of my career has been spent in the engineering office, and quite often myself and other people on the engineering team just get these requirements from product managers, from salespeople, from executives, whatever, right? You got to build this, right? What I found really works is a lot of times I was just insistent. I need to go out there and talk to the people that are using it. So going into the jungle, you know, and talking to not just the manager of the department. Most of the products I've worked on have been for some sort of industrial or commercial kind of application, so it's not kind of the general masses.
Sure.
But not going in necessarily, I have a few questions, but going into the I don't know. I really don't know, and I want to find out more about what the people are using products for, what their pains are, and actually talking to the person, the end user, talking to the person on the assembly line, talking to the service tech, talking to those people have the richest information, I think, because quite often by the time it gets to their boss's boss, it's diluted and it's filtered through those people's lenses, and we've all got them, right? So to me, it's just going in with getting various people in, getting the designers in, getting people, cross-functional people coming in, and talking to the people that are actually using it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's the old adage of 2 ears, 1 mouth, right? Listen more than you talk. So it's important. So with consumer products, though, like Steve, you've got obviously a lot of experience in consumer products. What are some of the methods that you've done to get it into the wild? These are global products that you've launched before. So
for me, I mean, I completely agree with everything that's been said so far. And actually, I can't remember if it was part of the panel or if it was earlier, some of the discussion that we had around finding those fundamental truths. I really like to ask questions about what you love and what you hate, because it'll drive not just the problem that people can describe, it will start getting them to describe more of the fundamental underlying reasons why these problems exist. So, you know, a love is just something where you might be able to build you know, that moment of joy, something that I can create that is going to draw that interest out. And the things that you hate are awesome, because, I mean, for me, that's where I get a lot of inspiration, because it's not only I want you to describe the problem that you have, I also want to know how you solve it, who you turn to, and it will give you not just product design cues, but marketing cues. If you go and talk to your customer and everybody says, oh, I turned to my buddy Bob, and it's like, well, what's so special about Bob? And oh, he's the tech guy, and I know he knows this, and he's got this kind of information. It's not just part of your product design now. You have a marketing channel. You know that you have to go find the Bobs of the world, and the next person on your interview list is that Bob guy. And the other thing that I also like to tell people, especially in startups, is that very first time you reach out to a customer, it's the hardest thing on the face of the planet to do, but I want you to not talk about your product. You know, like, I want to understand life and, you know, patterns and routines and the things that you do and the problems that exist and the reasons why those problems are there. And I kind of just want people to ignore the fact that they're trying to sell a product, because that, as soon as I come in and say, well, I'm trying to sell robotics, I'm gonna seed the mentality of the people that I'm talking to. Yep. I'm gonna get them thinking, oh my God, you're gonna take my job, right? Yeah. And those type of questions end up leading to very biased answers. And so I just try and convince people that talk about your product none until the end of the meeting and then bring it up.
That's interesting. Are there any questions? Go ahead, sir.
So for the end of the lecture from the agency, we actually use, we're an media company that uses technology to revolutionize travel, make it easier for corporate companies. But Matt, you were talking about using design as a differentiator in your company. And over at Community Tech, I was listening to an interview by Ian Koopman in which he said, you need to be paranoid about your competitors, about what they're doing in the innovation space. And I wanted to see, in terms of user design, what kind of, how much do you listen to what other people are doing in the space? How much does that affect you in terms of a CEO, how you approach your business, and how particularly you approach your interface? If you know that another competitor might be doing it this way, does that affect how you go about designing your product at the end of the day?
I have a love-hate relationship with my competition. I think it's really important to have competition. I think that signals that you're in a really healthy market. And I think if you spend too much time dwelling on the competition, then you're focusing on, like by the time your competition releases a product, it's based on thinking that they had 12 months prior. So it's really important to focus more forward-looking based on, we focus like ruthlessly on the customer. It's important to have the benchmarking. You do need to have the insights, and there are really good things that you can learn to help create shortcuts in how you do things. The situation that we're in the market is we kind of got started in this space a couple of years before a lot of people realized that that there was an opportunity here, and so our competitors are fast following us, which means we do need to be very paranoid, and we always need to be pushing forward, and this is an area where I really want to make design a competitive advantage, because if you look at some of the other competitors in this space, they haven't gone through the category of blood, sweat, and tears that we are in design. And the way that manifests in terms of core competencies, well, let's talk about industrial design, for instance. Our smaller auto vehicle is solid block cast zinc that's then machined and polished after the fact, and it's an exoskeleton to the entire vehicle. It's basically a small little mini tank. There is no other company in the space right now that has invested in the manufacturing processes that underlie the industrial design that we've created, and that offers unique value to our customer. And so we really are trying to make design a competitive advantage, because we feel that it's not yet something that our competitors have really been applying the focus to. And you need to inform strategies on where do you want to differentiate yourself. I would rather be the BMW of our market than the Honda Civic of our market. And so that informs how we invest and bring products into the space. I don't know if that answers your question.
What are your thoughts, Janice?
I think it is important part of the creating a future-facing strategy is to acknowledge your competitors, part of that external environment, what is happening with your users, what shifts are happening, and also looking internally at what your capabilities are, and also importantly, what your internal culture is, what are the actual core beliefs and actions of your internal culture to make sure that it aligns with your strategy. And when you're looking at and the external environment, the sort of users of the future, when you're creating that strategy, I encourage you to look broader beyond if you're doing a certain technology or if you're looking at travel, just looking at the travel industry or that tech in that space alone. But thinking broader, things that you wouldn't think of normally that impacts your industry but could make a big difference. Maybe for Clearpath as an example, what if there is legislation that comes in that restricts robots in the workplace? What if there's a huge societal backlash? What if there are new ways of mining that make your resources easier or more difficult to attain? If conflict metals becomes more of an issue in society, and all of a sudden you might have to shift your business because people are aware of those things. To make a sort of product or a future-facing strategy that meets those needs of the future users, you have to think broader than perhaps your normal comfort zone and think how that might in turn impact your business.
Any thoughts, Steve?
So market research is, market research is a really important thing. But I know from experience, my time at BlackBerry, the one thing I fought against the most was about people trying to build product based off of market research. It is a great business to be in if you are trying to become the fast follower. It's a great tool for, you know, places where manufacturing is cheap and I can just build a product and I can sell it at a cheaper cost. And if that's your primary value proposition is I'm going to make something cheaper than everybody else, then market research is fantastic. As soon as you want to create a product that's innovative or new, market research is great to understand the base and what everybody else is doing. But sometimes what you have to do is try and find the hole, like find the place that everybody else is focusing on, like building evolutionary product and evolving the market. And in BlackBerry days, it's putting bigger screens on things and, you know, getting rid of buttons and now getting rid of headsets. But there's a problem with that, is that that's not where evolutionary or revolutionary product comes from. That's not where you're going to create a massive insight and create brand new technology. So sometimes you have to look at the direction of the market and choose a different path, and that's how you create a market advantage.
So it's interesting. In the last sessions, I wanted to make sure people shared experiences of fire, things that blew up in the market for them. And I'm trying to find what's the emotional thing that we can actually talk about here. So what I've decided is that there needs to be a chair throwing incident. And I'll throw the first chair. But it's interesting because what you've talked about, and I don't disagree with you, I think there's a tension though. There's this idea, and I used Janice's previous note to me, which was, you know, didn't Henry Ford say that if he asked users what they wanted, they would ask for faster horses? And you see this famous Steve Jobs face up there, and, you know, my tension that I have with founders and entrepreneurs is they all think they're Steve Jobs. They are not. You are not. I am not. Okay? And so there's a tension that says, you know, I will tell the market what it wants, and there's a part of bullshit with that. So how do we balance that tension? How do we make sure that we're being real and we're getting customer feedback and we are using market data, but also not just being a follower? Give it, Steve. You do it. I know you want to do it. I threw the chair at you, but I know Janice wants in.
So there's a bunch of things that you brought up that I think are really interesting and great things to talk about.
Pick one.
Henry Ford? No. So the reality is that when you start creating a product and you think you are going to be Steve Jobs and create the next big thing, you're taking a massive risk, right? And actually, speaking of Malcolm Gladwell, there's a great notion of what that is, and it's the understanding of risk is one thing, and having complete insecurity about what's going to happen next is a whole other thing, where, you know, it's not a detailed amount of risk, it's not something that you know you can comprehend, and it's not market understanding and market risk. It's I'm going to go out there and create something new. The thing you have to understand with that is as soon as you jump into that space, you're probably going to fail. Like, it's the nature of it. And sometimes building product that you know isn't going to fail is about making compromise, and is about, like, the idea of I'm going to build a product that stands out from a design perspective, or I'm going to build a product that fits in from a design perspective. Like, medical space is riddled with these kind of things, where sometimes you need to build a product that fits in, that fits all of the market needs, and you need to have a long-term strategy and growth plan so that you can start building a product that will eventually evolve to the product that you want it to be. But you have to sacrifice your dreams for that first version to get into market, to get that first step in. And if you don't do that and you take that aggressive approach, you go up to a doctor and say, I'm going to build a medical device that's going to tell you all of the diagnoses from this point forward, you will never get into market because they don't want to be replaced. They want to be assisted. And it's a great tension. It's a great thing to design for. And personally, I love those challenges because there is no great answer. It's a compromise, regardless of which way you take.
Beep.
And I'll try not to swear again. And yeah.
I'll let it go.
So I think that, you know, saying that, well, if I asked people what they wanted, you know, they would have had a faster horse. It's like, well, fundamentally though, and this goes back to that research question, it's that I don't want to ask you if you want a faster horse. I don't want to ask you if you whatever. I want to know that you want to go from point A to point B faster. And that was the real insight. And when everybody starts talking about horses, it drives me nuts because it was never the question. It's not the point, right? Like, anyway, I could probably rant about this forever.
You could, I won't let you.
All right.
Go, Janice, real quick.
Yeah, I'm going to follow on Steve's thing and finish perhaps, because I think we're on the same wavelength for that. Like, I think I have heard people using that. The reason why I put this in as a question is because I've heard it firsthand as a way of, or an excuse not to talk to their users or listen to their users, because they'll just say they want a faster horse. But I think that's more of a market research approach. It's that listening to people's opinions or what they say. Whereas a good design researcher looks at what they do. Or they want to know the why behind saying that. If you're talking to somebody and they say, well, why do you want a faster horse? Well, I want to get to point A to point B in a quick way, and the train line doesn't go near my house. Or maybe if they were following somebody around for that day, they saw the person get up at 3 in the morning to go to the market in the next town, and it was dark out, and they had to load up their wagon, and it took so long to get there, and they were beat then by everybody coming to the market at the next town. That's a real user need, and then that sort of unearths something that could lead to, for example, a car. And I also want to point out that Henry Ford did not invent the car. So when people are like, oh, Henry Ford, he invented the car. He didn't, so he just found a massive use for it. So it's again, going back to not taking what people say at face value, digging into the why they're doing it, or perhaps observing their behavior. That's the key to finding good user insight.
Do you want to add on there, Les?
Thank you. I agree with what Steve and Janice say as well. And one person I'm really super inspired by lately is Otto Scharmer, who developed the U theory at MIT. And he talks about being drawn to the past. Like we have these pulls on us, the past. And when I consider the past, it's like what we know already, what our competitors are doing. Because like you say, by the time a competitor actually comes out with something, it's old thinking anyways, versus what the emerging future is drawing us to do. So it's a big concept, but what I like about that is holding out a vision. So as a person, as a product designer, holding out a vision for what kind of world we want to see, how our products can help move us towards that, and also realizing that's kind of way out there. So it's kind of a beacon and it's a pull. So like you say, Steve, it's a matter of, sometimes it's a matter of compromising to put something out in the market that we know is going to be accepted, but also having, you know, new features and going towards that more idealistic vision. So I realize that that's not a canned yes or no kind of answer, but I think it's both. I think as designers, we feel the pull of doing things the way the market accepts it, and also recognizing that there's a better way. And frankly, when I look at the world today, I mean, as designers, I think we have a tremendous opportunity over time to make this place a better place, and I think we're being called to do it. So doing things the way it's always been done doesn't necessarily work.
You know, the one thing I've learned from working with designers is I'm never going to get a yes or no answer, ever. Never, ever, ever, ever. And it's okay. No, I want to move on. We only have 9 minutes left.
Sorry, can I just add something here?
Oh yeah, sure, go ahead.
Well, there's a really good conversation happening here, and the application of this into your businesses, I don't know if it's a normal tool. Again, like I said, user experience design is one of the areas that I'm least experienced in, but a framework that we use is called the Jobs to be Done framework. And the Henry Ford example, the job that needed to be done was getting from point A to point B. The question that you ask yourself as a designer is, how can I create a better way to get from point A to point B? The example that we use inside of our company is a wooden plank with a hole in it,
And if you work in a company and you've got drill bits and your job is to drill holes, the job that needs to be done is holes in the wood. And if you're a drill bit manufacturer and you just continuously focus on a sharper, better drill bit that wears less and the total cost of ownership is, you know, better and incrementally better and better and better, and then somebody comes out of left field and has a laser that can drill a hole faster, you're pooched, right? The job that needs to be done is the hole, not the drilling. And so the application of this conversation is, when you're thinking about your user, ask yourself what job needs to be done and what is the best way to get that job done? Or what is the future way to get that job done?
We're going to let Randy get in on that one.
Sure, just a quick comment. I mean, in terms of also tying in sort of the act of design and into business, one of the best pieces of advice, practical advice that I've ever gotten was to fail fast, fail early. And I think this sort of ties into the whole sort of research aspect as well. I mean, it's great you can talk to users, but as soon as you can get something in front of them, doesn't even have to be functional, even if it's just a piece of cardboard with a bunch of stickers everywhere, get in front of them and they'll be glad to give you an opinion on that. And you'll learn so much more from that piece of cardboard than you'd ever learn from just talking about something as well. So. And I know we talked a lot about the sort of the fidelity of prototypes and the fidelity of the viable product, but in terms of the development process, if you can just get something down, you'll know when you failed and you know when you've hit it.
So 6 minutes. So I got yelled at last time for going over. Are there any other questions in the audience before I go on to other questions that I've written down? No? Okay. I do want to ask, because one of the things I've noticed in the region, obviously hardware is something we're really focused on, but frankly, there's a lot of software, and unfortunately, you need software to make hardware run. So, you know, there's, what, where is he? There he is. It's you, my favorite software guy over there. Right? So what I want to look at, though, is it different with software versus hardware? Like how, you know, I'll let Steve grab this one to start. Is there a different process we use? Is there a different plan of attack? Like how do we do this differently, or if not at all, different?
So, yeah, I like talking about design processes in general, and I have a slide that I like to use that says, you know, here's all the different design processes and why they're all wrong. But it's that they all have flaws, because the reality is that we have to be dynamic in how we approach any problem. Saying that there's a fundamental difference between hardware and software, I would disagree. I think that fundamentally you're trying to solve a problem for a person. And a lot of that comes down to the way you describe a problem and how a problem is discovered. It gives an indication of what the solution is. But it's also that you can start coming up with a solution that ends up becoming, I'm going to build a technical solution for this one very specific problem, and halfway through this process you realize that I can apply this in a variety of different ways. And I've even worked on products where they start out as a hardware solution and end up being a software solution, just because through that discovery process you realize that, you know, the intent, the real problem that I'm passionate about is this is the thing I'm trying to solve, and my original technical approach applies, but maybe it isn't the best fit. And now I'm going to go back and reevaluate. I love the tension between having a technical solution that solves a technical problem and the human side of it, because the reality is a human problem can be solved in a variety of different technical ways, and a technical solution can solve a variety of human problems. It's about what the experience is that sits on top of those things. So the thing is about when I approach software or hardware, you have to go in completely with an open mind and realize that you could be wrong, and being open to, you know, how being wrong changes you to make a better product. So that's a very long answer to
simple question.
The same.
Yeah, and it's interesting though, and the reason I wanted to ask is just because I want people to know that there is no different approach. There's not, here's the software way and the hardware way. There's an approach, and you use the right tool for the problem that you're trying to solve for, but don't go into preconceived notions that you have the right tool for the job. right? Are there any other thoughts to build on that? I'm sure, Randy, with your experience with hardware, software, implementations, et cetera?
I mean, yeah, I guess my main focus is more on hardware, but I do take the approach that, you know, design as a process in general, what we're doing is solving a problem, right? And what are the steps, what are the tools that you need to take to go and solve that problem, whether it's hardware, software, whether you're doing interior design or whatever. We're all sort of deep diving into that sort of that technical and emotional need of that problem, you know, through research and prototyping.
Go ahead, Les.
Yeah, I would agree that developing hardware and software is essentially the same at the core of the principles that are brought to it, and it becomes more of a scheduling issue because often with hardware there's lead times on getting injection molds made or die-cast molds or boards spun or whatever like that. So that's to me what I see as the bigger challenge, which often puts pressure on the designers and the engineers that are building physical parts, that there's less time for that kind of dreaming and iterating and so on. So oftentimes that has to be done sooner in the process, where software, as everybody knows, is often the last thing to get finished and continues to iterate once the product's out on the market.
Okay, go ahead.
In terms of, yeah, I think I've worked in hardware and software. I've worked in public policy for governments. I've worked in service design. There's all generally the same kind of, if you look at flow or process, but that's not to say it is a neat one. Like you see all those design thinking models that would say, first you empathize with the users, and then you define the problem, and then you iterate, and then you prototype and test, and then nice product, nice and neat. Never goes that way, but you have to be okay with that, and okay that you're gonna have to go back, and you're gonna be at the step at the very end, and you might find something that messes everything up, and you gotta go right back to the beginning to iterate or to empathize. And that's scary, but that's okay, that's part of it, and you'll always get a better product for it. I find people are afraid to do this because, and try to put off kind of the user input to the very end, because nobody likes to be told their baby is ugly, so they'd like to avoid that. But I promise you, it'll get, like, if you embrace that ambiguity and are open to different answers to your solution, or maybe questioning whether your solution's necessary in the first place, it's going to be better in the end. So it's okay, you're gonna get frustrated, it's normal.
So, okay. Last question though, because we're going to be out of time.
Well,
So-
first of all,
Hold on.
this is, okay,
No
I'm gonna have to,
sacrifices of small animals, no voodoo.
I'll get off the soapbox and I'll try not to, I could wax poetic.
Very quick.
I think the big thing is that it's not about predicting the future. I can't predict the future. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't have magic. Anybody that says they can predict the future is wrong. I apologize. What my work is about probing and exploring the range of possibilities that could happen. And the further out you go, the more differences that could happen. And what are the curveballs that you're not expecting that could hit you down the road? And then how do you develop a more resilient strategy for that? And what things do you watch for to see if those different futures are coming to light? So I'm sorry, I can't tell you what the future is going to be, but I can help you explore what it might be, or what different futures could be, and then help you accommodate or adapt to those.
Okay, so
Sorry.
other than Proline picks, which I'm interested in, we're going to have to bring this to a close. It's 1:31. What I'm hoping is, my goal for the session really was that it gives you a better understanding of the design process, that there is a process to it. You can actually have creativity inside of a process, and ultimately that there is value to the process to go through, and lots of different ways to approach it. Don't go in with preconceived notions, and don't lead the witness, but be open to alternate ideas and thoughts, and you may be surprised with what you end up developing and delivering to the marketplace. Okay? So with that, thank you very much, all of you. And David, you want to close us? He's our closer.
First of all, I'd like to give a huge round of applause to the panel. This was really, really well done. So. And also, despite the fact that we bicker a lot, Don is my boy, and he did an amazing job as moderator, so thank you, Don.
Meet you.
So we're just going to present the panelists. Again, thank you. So in about 2 seconds, you're going to see there's gift bags behind you. So we provided you with some swag. So thank you again for joining us. And thanks everyone for showing up. This was a really, really cool one. We have one more of these, which is going to be great for me because I get back to real life, but I've had a really good time doing them. So I hope you join us again here next week for Accelerate DFX designed for durability, longevity, and reliability, which will be hosted with Kath and Carol from Sober Steering. And yeah, that's about it. Again, thank you. Thanks to the City of Kitchener. They were really, really helpful in getting us this room, which has been amazing. So yeah, that's about it. Thanks again, guys.